Hello, and welcome to Inside the Milky Way, a look at early alternative music. I am Jeff, and this is the story of Chrome. This is a band that used a raw and blended sound of elements taken from punk rock and psychedelia, along with noise, experimental, and very early industrial music sounds. The result would be a forerunner to later industrial rock and noise rock. Chrome's music would often use minimalist song structures and take on science fiction themes, and with these sounds that we mention, including the likes of tape experimentation, distortion, overloaded acid rock style guitar, found sounds from television, and whatever noise that they could create with electronics. This all makes Chrome a very extreme and very unusual alternative rock band, one that commercial success eluded during their time in the San Francisco music scene of the 70s, after they started around 1975-76 by Damon Edge. But after the addition of guitarist Helios Creed in 1977, after the first album is when he came on board, they became a cult band favorite with some success in the UK and Germany from album number 2, Alien Soundtracks, and the follow-up to that, Half Machine Lip Moves. Edge and Creed went separate directions in the mid-'80s, with Damon Edge continuing the Chrome band until he passed away in 1995. Subsequently, Helios Creed, who had been away from the band since the mid-'80s, revived the Chrome name for recordings and performances, and he's continued that band to today. This episode will discuss the band's early years, their music, and the work of Chrome, especially during the Edge and co-creator Creed years. Let's talk about Damon Edge and how he got this band started. Damon Edge was born in 1949 as Thomas Edward Tom Weiss in Los Angeles. He went to Inglewood High School and on to California Institute of the Arts, where he earned a bachelor's degree in environmental arts in 1970. Tom Weiss's early experimentation with music was creating unusual sounds and soundscapes. He began working at MGM, where he collaborated with other musicians to create soundtracks for films. It would be this concept of soundtracks that Chrome's albums were often compared to, sounding like a soundtrack from a sci-fi movie. At one point during the early 70s, Weiss took a trip to Morocco, where he was introduced to something new to him, and that was Arabic music. Upon returning to California, he adopted his new name of Damon Edge and a new approach to music with these new sounds to go with the ideas he had already been working on. Edge would create new beats and atmospheric sounds with his ideas and productions for songs in a 3- and 8-note melody style, usually layered with a tonal drone backed by a rhythm section. This sort of atmosphere was influenced by the music he'd heard in Morocco, and after about 6 months after that trip, Edge began forming a new band and recording his music. Chrome was then formed in the late 1975 and early 1976 by the enigmatic Damon Edge, after taking all this inspiration from his work at Cal Arts, along with his adventure to Morocco. Edge's contributions to this new band would be vocalist, drummer, and keyboardist, and he was joined by Gary Spain, who was a bassist, guitarist, and violinist. The name Chrome was used as Edge had said he felt it was a good representation of the metallic and industrial feel of the 70s. He has also referenced it as it representing his feeling from Art Deco and the Surrealistic movement in the same time as the Art Deco movement. Chrome, in their first incarnation, drew inspiration from artists ranging from King Crimson to the Stooges. They recorded their first album, The Visitation, and they brought on, besides Edge and Spain, they brought in 2 other musicians, John Lambden for guitar and Mike Lowe, guitarist, but also he became the primary vocalist on this debut album. After recording The Visitation, Edge sent the album to Warner Brothers to see if they wanted to release it as an album. A Warner Brothers A&R representative told Edge that the album sounded like a messed up Doors album, which Damon Edge took this as a compliment. But the label did not release the album. The next step for Edge was to set up his own label, Siren Records, and release this debut, which he self-produced. Unlike Chrome's later albums, The Visitation is more psychedelic and contains some elements of progressive rock and blues. All Music described its style as an early Brian Eno meets Santana type of album. And this was maybe more pop, although not pop. than anything later from the band, and this was not the fully developed Chrome sound that we would get from album number 2 and beyond. But the sci-fi leanings of some of their music was already in place with this work. Mike Lowe was the primary vocalist on the album, not Edge, who would eventually assume these duties full-time for Chrome. But for now, he was primarily the drummer on this album. One song, Return to Zanzibar, was one track on the album that had the band referencing Edge's Stooges influence, and this would be the only song on the album that was sung by Edge. Damon Edge also designed the cover work, which he would do for much of the early albums and releases for Chrome, and on this one, it was the band's name spray-painted on the cover. After the recording of the first album, singer Mike Lowe left the band, and he would then be replaced by the new guitarist Helios Creed, who had met Edge in San Francisco. Creed was born in 1953 as Barry Johnson in Long Beach, California, before moving to Hawaii when he was 6. His brother, a couple years older, introduced him around that time to psychedelic music. When Creed was 12, his parents bought him his first guitar, and he became a serious student of the guitar right away. Creed has said he invented his trademark sound while trying to replicate the sound he heard in his head while listening to Black Sabbath on LSD on headphones when he was a teenager. He moved to San Francisco in the mid-'70s, and this is when he would meet up with Edge. Over the years, Creed and his guitar mastery uses a large number of effects on his voice and his guitar, including echoes, phase shifters, flangers, guitar synthesizers, fuzz, and octave dividers. Creed, in a 2021 interview, cited the influence of the emerging punk rock scene as the new change in the sound to Chrome when he came on board. Back in 1977, Edge was talking to Creed about joining the band, and he was really into the new punk rock scene at that time, so Edge played the new Sex Pistols record for Creed. Creed, unfamiliar with this, had an initial reaction that he felt the guy with the group couldn't sing. Damon said he's not supposed to know how to sing. That is what punk rock is about. Creed said, "Wow, cool, let's be punk rock." And Creed was in the band, and that led to the next album. Around the same time, Edge reached out to create some music for the San Francisco porno magnates and entrepreneurs, the Mitchell brothers, famous or infamous for a number of things, but they were creators of the classic movie Behind the Green Door. Edge created a soundtrack that was to be played at a live sex show to run in North America and in the Ultra Room at the O'Farrell Theater in San Francisco. Edge submitted a recording of the soundtrack to the Mitchell brothers, and they didn't like it, saying it was not easy to dance to and was too radical. Per Creed, that's what they had said, it was too radical. So the remaining members of Chrome, along with the new member Creed, reworked the material into an album. What started as what would have been known as the Ultra soundtrack turned into what would become album number 2 from the band, Alien Soundtracks. 1977's Alien Soundtracks is the second studio album, released by Siren Records, produced by Edge, and this would be the debut recording with Helios Creed in the band. The album was more like a collage of material from the so-called porno soundtrack, along with leftovers from Edge's visitation work and the thoughts and concepts from Creed and various sound approaches and guitar work that he brought on board. This was the beginning of the classic sound of Chrome that we know, and the cult status of this band would start at this point. The record included the use of a drum machine on a number of songs, and using this much more prominently than a lot of bands would feature during those years. But this would, of course, become very frequently used into the 1980s. Chrome would fade songs in and out on this. They used distorted vocals. They would use multi-tracks. With Alien Soundtracks, Chrome created a dense, dark, sci-fi psychedelic world. During recording, Chrome, aided by Creed's input, largely abandoned conventional rock compositions. Instead, they went to using this cut-up and collage technique and heavily processed sound to create this new sci-fi punk style. Creed's grinding guitar attack, Edge's tape manipulation on tracks like All Data Lost and Chromosome Damage would characterize the Chrome sound moving forward. And that song, Chromosome Damage, that opens the album, and it's an immediate fade into the music. The song fades in and out of other sounds during the song. That is just a great way to start this album in this new Chrome sound. Song titles fit the sci-fi theme from this album. Some were like All Data Lost, Slip It to the Android, Magnetic Dwarf, Reptile, and Ferrochromium, just to name a few of the songs. The album was critically acclaimed by a number of publications in the UK, and Chrome began gradually to gain this cult reputation in the UK and Europe. Head Heritage wrote about this album. Alien Soundtracks is where every aspect of Chrome is at its peak. At every speed, in every facet, as each barrage of electronic space debris, taped dialogue, and collaged subterranean fears all get refracted through Damon Edge's hypersensitive and distorted mental lenses that project outwards into a crazy quilt of half-caught meaning that, however disjointed the content, which pitches and tosses at every turn, a unity emerges that remains invigorating and consistent at every turn. That was kind of long-winded there, but that is what Head Heritage had said about this album. Alternative Press named it as one of the 15 best punk albums to have come out in 1977. They wrote, if Iggy and the Stooges' raw power was the sound of the Rolling Stones in hell, then Alien Soundtracks was the sound of the Stooges in hell, as a lo-fi, sci-fi soundscape. The crude bashing and trash compactor riffing had an acid-damaged edge, making this record both an avant-punk staple and early industrial rock statement. The album, in its life since then, has had a long life, having been reissued several times on different labels. Beggar's Banquet in the UK in 80, and then again in 81 in Italy, then in 88 in Germany, and in the United States in 90, and again in 2007 and 2012. This album has come to life many times. After recording Alien Soundtracks, John Lambden left the band, and their third studio album, Half Machine Lip Moves, would be the next release, also on Siren Records, and this was in March of 1979, taking influences from Germany's krautrock scene, particularly from New and Faust. This Damon Edge produced Half Machine Lip Moves continued in the vein of the previous album, but it was heavier this time, with Creed's feedback guitar more to the front of the music. Edge's drumming on this album including hitting pieces of scrap metal. Half Machine Lip Moves probably has become the best known work from the band. The creation of Half Machine Lip Moves was primarily Damon Edge and Helios Creed. Spain, who had been more of a part of the band previously, had bass added on just 2 of the songs on this album. AllMusic describes the album's basic elements as aggressive but cryptic performance and production, jump cuts between and in songs, judicious use of sampling and production craziness, and an overall air of looming science fiction, apocalypse, and doom. Some critics felt this record kind of fell more to the post-punk realm than what they were headed to in the industrial sound, but that's probably because they didn't know how to categorize this music. They weren't completely sold or understanding the new sound, this direction, and the effort. It was listed as number 62 on the British magazine's The Wire list of 100 records that set the world on fire while no one was listening. And this was cited as the beginning of industrial rock. In 2013, New York Times wrote that one of the things that makes the record so good is how intriguing the grooves and pockets and riffs are, how close the music theoretically seems to be getting to something more universally appealing. David Bowie's sound at that moment, for example. So they were comparing it to something what David Bowie was doing in that same time period. From songs on this album, you should check out Zombie Warfare, Can't Let You Down. This is the album's second track. It has a screeching guitar riff, pulsing drums, and distorted vocals, giving a robotic sci-fi feel. It's a good example of the band at this time. Per AllMusic, starting with the fragmented assault of TV as Eyes, that's the first song on the album, which rapidly descends into heavily treated conversational snippets from TV and deep droning keyboards. Half Machine sounds like a weird broadcast from thousands of miles away, where rock is treated as an exotic musical form. The drum machine they used on this was given the name from the band as John Q. Cyborg, a play on the name John Q. Public, and this gave the band a more mechanicalized and industrial sound, kind of fitting with the Chrome name. After the second album, Chrome moved into the next phase of its music with an EP called Read Only Memory. The 5-track release reconfirmed them as some of the most unique and unusual musicians in rock. This 1979 EP was created by only Edge and Creed doing all the instruments. Apparently, this was written after a short opium bender, and the release wasn't so much music as it was a sonic experiment. Most of the songs have no cadence or beat, and they are instead distorted with sound effects butted up against each other. This EP, Read Only Memory, becomes something of a proto-noise record and a foreshadowing of the noise rock sound of the 80s. The band's music from these early works has been cited as an influence from Nine Inch Nails, MGMT, Pavement, Steve Albini, and the Butthole Surfers, among others. But part of what held this band back at this point was lack of live performances. Of course, anytime a band goes out and performs live, it helps expand their audience. But this was a band that had only performed a couple of times live in this early era. That album that we were just talking about, Half Machine Lip Moves, and that EP that followed it, cemented the band's growing reputation in the UK, and it led to the band being signed to Beggars Banquet Records for their fourth album, Red Exposure. By this time, Chrome consisted solely of Edge and Creed. This album marked a move away from the more frenetic style of the two previous albums, and it had more use of drum machines and synthesizers. Chrome, around this time, also had 3 songs on a compilation record that was released on Ralph Records. That was called Subterranean Modern and included a few other bands. And in April of 1980, this is when the fourth album, Red Exposure, was released by Beggars Banquet. The band would release a single, New Age, from this. That's the first single the band had released. This album was probably a little more in line with the record label's wanting and desires, and not so much the uncompromised sound of Chrome's albums that they had previously released. While the record has plenty of abstract space exploration, many of the songs are perfectly timed for radio play, and they're built around verse-chorus form, even though they're still screaming robots and bent guitar solos and voices hissing and whatever through the music. They're still that, but it's a little bit different this time. The more accessible sound was partially due to the studio engineer working on this with them. That was Oliver DeCicco. He had also worked with groups like Dead Kennedys, Tuxedo Moon, and MX-80. Per journalist Neil Martinson, when Chrome entered DeCicco's studio, they had barely any material written. Working with DeCicco's input, the band cut an LP that was a bit closer to the snappy sci-fi of Gary Newman and Kraftwerk, but still filtered through their own warped sensibility. They also talk about the song Static Gravity, which had a dub beat and poppy synths in the record, which was definitely different from what they had done previously, and that was more along new wave sounds. And as with all Chrome records, though, despite this friendlier sound and the vocals having some clarity, the lyrics were still as unusual and strange as they ever had been. From Neil Raggett in AllMusic, continuing deeper into the self-created world of weird alien skies and man-machine biology, among many other things, Edge and Creed, still working with John Cyborg, whipped up Red Exposure. Released as it was in the UK by Beggars Banquet during the heyday of Gary Newman, Red Exposure probably came across as the whacked-out American version of the modern machine music Newman, or more appropriately Cabaret Voltaire, was whipping up. And that was from AllMusic. So some other things started to change in 1980. In 1980, Edge met singer Fabienne Sheen, formerly of the band Shaking Street, and they got married 2 months after meeting. Sheen had been a French musician raised in Paris. In the late 60s, she began working as a film actress in both Italy and France, and she is best known today for her uncredited appearance as the woman of the trees in the movie Barbarella. Sheen started writing songs and composing her own music at an early age. She traveled the world and with her guitar and met the band Led Zeppelin, who liked her music. Robert Plant and Jimmy Page often jammed with her and finally suggested she should create her own band. After touring the U.S. with Led Zeppelin, Sheen went back to Europe and started a band with a young guitarist, Eric Levi, and this band was called Shaking Street. Shaking Street in 1978 released its first album, Vampire Rock. That album was never released in the U.S., but the band moved to California soon afterwards. And in 1979, they recorded their second album. And in 1980, this is when she met Damon Edge. She would go on to collaborate with Damon Edge on several future Chrome albums, and her vocals would appear in their upcoming album, one of their upcoming albums, Third from the Sun. Back to 1980 and early 1981, the band would create an EP, In Worlds. They would also add a new rhythm section to support Creed and Edge. This would be John and Hillary Haynes, also known as the Stench Brothers, who had been part of the band Pearl Harbor and the Explosions. This lineup would release the next album, Blood on the Moon, in May of 1981. It was released on Don't Fall Off the Mountain Records. It was co-produced by Creed and Edge and took advantage here of this new rhythm section. This record was another step towards regular rock music. The work of Blood on the Moon was one of the band's most cohesive and tightly written records, somewhat similar in the sonics to that of Red Exposure. The album was almost void of the trademark Chrome effects of machinery, noise, and tape effects. A lot of this was probably due to the addition of the Stench Brothers and they contributing ideas from their experiences. Third from the Sun is the sixth studio album. It was released in May of 1982, also by Don't Fall Off the Mountain record labels. The Quietist described this album as more gothic space rock. AllMusic gave Third from the Sun the highest rating of any of their Chrome albums that they reviewed, and CMJ Music Monthly called it magnificent. Fabienne Sheen provided backing vocals here. We mentioned before she would be on one of the future albums for music for vocals. This would be the one. She provided backing vocals on Off the Line and Shadows of a Thousand Years. However, at this point, the inner group resentments were growing. Edge was spending more time with his wife, and this was impacting the Creed-Edge cohesion in the group. Third from the Sun was probably the darkest album that came out of the group, and it might be because of some of these inner relationship issues that were going on. It was also a very mature album. Music critic Tom Hazelmeyer has noted they kind of reinvented themselves with the drony repetitive thing. Firebomb is a classic, as was the song Electric Chair. This is the pinnacle album. The song Firebomb that I mentioned would be a single from this album. It's driven by a distorted guitar riff with a sinister voice talking about being attacked by explosives. Also in this album, the title track has some of Creed's best guitar theatrics. So this album was a very cohesive album from the band, but as we mentioned, with this growing inner tension, the Creed and Edge relationship was almost done at this point. Chrome Box would be a box set released on December 7th, 1982 by Subterranean Records. It contained multiple albums. It had Alien soundtracks, Half Machine Lip Moves, Blood on the Moon, plus Chronicles 1 and Chronicles 2, as well as another compilation, No Humans Allowed. And this was all made up all of this album. My favorite track from those added compilation albums as part of this was the song In a Dream. Love that song. They would have a single, Anorexic Sacrifice, released in 1982. Anorexic Sacrifice was a song with Edge's howling over Creed's black metalish riffs. It was very compact, almost a commercial song, as per some of this later Chrome sound over the last couple of albums. This was on the Chronicles 1 album as part of this package. A massive sidelong psychic venture, Wings Born in the Night, was taking the band back to their earlier sounds of King Crimson style mind trips with the Chrome sci-fi destruction, of course, in it. This was part of the Chronicles 2 album that was part of this box set. And the release of Chronicles 2 ended with one of Chrome's high points, by what some would say, an 18-minute song, Johanna Lion. This has been referenced as a Sabbath meets Bauhaus number, and Creed makes references to ancient biblical concepts and draws them into a bleak future. And what one critic has said, it's harder to sum up Chrome better than that. And that would be the last song on Chronicle, as part of these Chronicles albums that came out with this box set. Abbreviated versions of Chronicles material was also released in France as an album called Raining Milk. And the full versions of Chronicles 1 and Chronicles 2, which are compilations of a lot of different music from the band from over the years, and some they'd released as part of the box set, would be released individually in 1987. So back in 1983, after Chrome Box, Edge moved to Paris. Sheen introduced him to her band, and a new lineup of Chrome was formed. Edge continued to record in France and release albums with various, mainly Europe-based musicians under the Chrome moniker over the next decade. But he was also releasing work under his own name as a solo artist. In all, Chrome had 8 albums under Edge from 1984 to 1994. And this was in addition to a few live albums and a couple of compilations. Edge put out 5 solo albums, although a lot of the solo work was very much like Chrome work. He was very prolific, as you could tell, with all these albums over this time period. Edge and Sheen returned to the U.S. in 1988, living in the Hollywood Hills, but they would later separate and divorce in the early 1990s. After this breakup, Edge began to drink and smoke heavily. He finished a new solo album in Germany, but in August 1995, Damon Edge was found dead in his Redondo Beach apartment in California. He'd been lying undiscovered for about a month until a neighbor alerted the police, and the cause of death was considered heart failure. Prior to his passing, Edge had been in contact with Creed, and they had talked about reforming Chrome. Regarding Sheen after the passing of her ex-husband Edge, she continued to compose songs. In 1997, she released an album called Nomad Nomad, and this was a title referencing her late husband. In 2004, she began working and touring again with Creed. In 1996, alternative press named Chrome as one of the 100 underground inspirations of the past 20 years. There's no doubt there's inspiration from this band and their work to a lot of genres of music and a lot of artists. After the passing of Edge, Helios at that time was still very involved in his own music, as well as an ambient side project he was working on called Dark Matter. But a few years later, he decided to reform Chrome with a new lineup, primarily to play live. But this turned out to be so successful, it led to more tours and releases of old material and a bunch of new material as well. So a Creed-led version of Chrome featured members of John and Hillary Stench, the Stench brothers again. They released albums and started touring in 1997 to 2001. Creed brought Chrome back again in 2014, and they've released a number of albums over the years. Totaling, Creed has 9 albums between 1997 and 2023 under the Chrome name. Creed has said, Chrome was something that Damon and I tapped into that was not controlled by either of us. Yet we both became a part of it, and it became a part of us, and we are connected forever. I miss Damon. I wish he could have made it through all the things that he was going through. To me, it's a very spiritual trip. It's a very special thing. It's a very cosmic thing, and that's why I want to keep doing it. And that's why I want to keep doing what I can do until I can't do it anymore. And that is some words of Creed regarding his relationship with Damon and what Chrome means to him. So check out the music of Chrome, in particularly those early albums that are classics and inspirational to a lot of genres and people and artists. Some of the music might be a little hard to get used to if you're not familiar with this kind of sounds and this kind of music, but check it out. I think you'll love it. And thank you for listening to our podcast episode. We'll be back next week with another one. And keep listening to us. And I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody that listens and all the fans. And we'll talk to you all real soon. Bye.